Good evening and welcome to our International Women's Day Eve webinar on inspiring inclusion. I'd like to extend a very special welcome to each of our panellists here this evening and thank them for sharing their time. I'd also like to welcome you all for sharing your time with us as well and joining this incredible conversation. Let me now take a moment to introduce each of our panellists to you. First, let me introduce you to Ms. Tricia Hobson, Board Chair at War Widows New South Wales. Tricia is a partner at law firm DLA Piper. She is a globally recognised industry leader with extensive experience in claims, complex party litigation, cross-border disputes, investigations, and is a leader in ESG. When she is not practicing law, Tricia dedicates her time giving back to the legal profession through mentoring and coaching, and to the community through non-executive director roles at non-for-profit organisations like our own. Welcome, Tricia.
Thanks very much, Renee. Lovely to be here.
Our next panellist is Ms. Sophie Ray, who is the Board Chair of RSL New South Wales. Sophie has been the Chair of RSL New South Wales since 2021. She is a non-executive director, business owner, and former lawyer herself. Sophie has extensive corporate governance experience, including in organisations that champion women, such as the National Association in Operations. A very warm welcome to you, Sophie.
Thanks so much for having me.
Our next panellist is Ms. Jennifer Collins AM, Board Director at Australian War Widows New South Wales and Chair of the Kokoda Track Memorial Walkway in Concord. Jennifer was previously the Deputy Commissioner at the Military Rehabilitation and Compensation Commission at the Department of Veterans Affairs for New South Wales and ACT. Jennifer has extensive experience in leadership roles at state and federal governments with postgraduate qualifications in health management and counselling. Welcome to you, Jennifer. Unfortunately, Jennifer, you are on mute.
Thank you, Renee. Well, happy International Women's Day for all those people that have joined us, and I hope they get an opportunity tomorrow to share some time with other women. Thanks, Renee.
Thank you, Jennifer. And finally, let me introduce you to Ms. Bernie Connolly, Executive Director at Morgan Stanley. Bernie manages investment for high net worth clients, foundations and non-for-profit organisations. In 2023, she was the highest ranked female in the Barron's list of top financial advisors. Starting her career in financial markets 30 years ago, Bernie is experienced in all areas of investment management, foreign exchange, money markets, fixed income derivatives and equities. And no, she is not available to give us financial advice as part of this webinar, but we do give you a very warm welcome, Bernie.
Thank you very much for having me here, Renee.
Thank you. I just want to take a minute and just look and reflect on the panel that we have in front of us. From my perspective, it's incredible, and I'm sure all those watching would agree, very humbling to have you all gathered with us today and willing and able to share your insights and your time with us as part of this conversation. Today, we're talking about inclusion and in particular, ensuring that women as they age remain included in our community, organisations and society. And we continue to hear their very important voices. I'm going to launch straight into the questions. And Tricia, you have vast board experience, including leading a very diverse board here at War Widows New South Wales in terms of age and experience. And I'm wondering what you've learned about the benefits that older women can bring to corporate governance.
Thanks, Renee. I have to say this is a really interesting topic for me and one which I'm really glad to be speaking about today. And excuse me, I've got a little bit of a cough, so I'll do my best to work through it. So particularly my experience here with War Widows and chairing and being on the board for the last 3 or 4 years, I think that experience has truly taught me as much about the importance of diversity in every sense as any of my governance experiences have. And by that I mean we have on our board, we have women in particular board members from their 30s through to 70s. And I think at one stage we even had someone in their 80s on the board. So that is an enormous generational spread in terms of voices at the boardroom table. And I'll come back in a moment and talk about the huge benefits that I've seen in terms of what I've learned and for corporate governance when it comes to older women and being on the board. But just stepping back, what I love about this on our board and the older women voices in particular is that we need our governance to be reflective of our workplace, our membership, etc. And at the moment, when you look at all workplaces, some have up to 5 generations sitting in them at the moment. And I think it's, from a corporate governance point of view, it's one of the most transitional periods where we've had as many generations as we've ever had. Now, boards, and which is the important governance role that they play, historically have been the older end of the generation, and not particularly diverse. But when I say older, also within bounds. And so, and of course, not very diverse from a gender point of view. And our topic here today is more about gender and women in particular. And for me, thinking about the benefits that older women have brought. So that's it's a long way of saying that my experience with War Widows has been very unique and really, I think, shown for me the huge benefits and what you can learn and what older women bring to the board table. So just talking about that experience, what I find really interesting, so we have a couple of, we have spots on our board that are purely for members, and a number of those over the years have been filled by older women. And interestingly too, they've been filled by older women who haven't come from a corporate background. So they're not steeped in normal governance. They haven't come through the corporate ranks. And what I find that they've brought is a number of things. Firstly, what I'll call unfiltered views. So they don't come to the table thinking about the issues in the way that I might necessarily, or Jennifer perhaps. They're members who have lots of vast world experience, but they're not, I suppose, shaped by the normal corporate governance through their careers. So they'll come and they'll give their unfiltered views on issues. And they're also not, they come with a view of, not with a view of what I'd call the hierarchy of the board, which traditionally has been something which I think women in particular have struggled with, because, you know, if there were women on the board, there might be one woman. It's very hard to have your voice heard. Even when you do voice, sometimes, you know, the old thing of sort of a woman says it doesn't get heard, men says it does get heard, things like that. They're not steeped in that sort of hierarchy. And so they're not scared to ask really open and honest questions. They're not intimidated or feel like they have to not ask the question. So they ask questions constantly, which make me stop and make me really think about looking at issues afresh and in a way that perhaps I hadn't looked at them for quite a while. So I find that aspect really important, and I've learned an enormous amount about my own approach to governance and how I chair and what I bring to a board through those women. The other thing, particularly, and this is relevant for our board, I find that the older women have brought a real connection to community and a real bringing everything that we do back to the member. So our membership, of course, has historically and still remains a beautiful group of women who are older now, but we are, of course, expanding and getting younger members too. And as a board, we've got a big job to do to include all of those women and make sure that everything we're doing is for their benefit. But our older members, I think in particular, always tell us the stories of their connection with women. They bring back the community spirit and the attitude. They remind us, particularly in this age of everything being connected digitally and our younger generation communicating through IT, these women are not IT savvy. It can cause a little frustration with the board and Zooms and issues and tech issues from time to time. But they remind us of the importance of communication and connection, and putting our members at the heart of every decision that we make as a board. And again, I think that's really important, because we see corporate stories all the time of where boards and senior executives don't quite remember to put their customer or their members at the heart of what they're doing, and we see what happens from a corporate governance point of view if that happens, and it can be disastrous. So they're just a few of the things that I think I've benefited from in terms of older women, and particularly in the corporate governance space.
Thanks, Tricia. What I'm hearing there is, I think it's an age-old adage, and we hear it across the sector at different times, but inclusion is good for everyone. And making sure that we do have that diversity and we are being inclusive in as many ways as possible, really make sure that the organisations that we're leading and running is always being reflective. It's always having the right intentions at its core, and guiding it as it moves through the ever-changing environment on the outside.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
And, you know, I couldn't agree more wholeheartedly. But you, Jennifer, and I have the benefit of knowing many ladies that have been through our board, and you know, they are absolutely incredible. And you know, they're just incredible. I could talk for days, and I'm not going to.
Yeah.
But Sophie, like Tricia, you have vast board experience, and also like Tricia, you're now leading a board in the veteran sector, a board that has had to bring more diversity on in terms of its age, probably leaning more the other way in terms of a younger demographic coming through your board, and gender. And I'm wondering, how has that been for your organisation? What barriers have you had to overcome in order to achieve that diversity that you're now starting to see come through your board?
So look, it's really interesting, as most of the people I think watching would know, RSL New South Wales has gone through a significant shift in the last 5 years, significant and very deliberate cultural shift. And a lot of that has been about diversity, about making sure that we are reaching out to our veterans who are younger, because traditionally, well, our average age until a few years ago, the average age of our members was 76. And we're quite proud that we've managed to get that down to 71. And we watch that really carefully at the board. But we've had an interesting, a different experience in terms of diversity, because there've actually always been a huge cohort of women within the RSL New South Wales membership, but traditionally they've been in the auxiliaries. So, you know, when I go out to sub-branches, there is still often a very physically obvious, distinct divide between the women who are doing what's seen as the auxiliary work, often, you know, making the lunches, doing a lot of the welfare work, and the men who tend to be running the committees and making the decisions. One of the things that's been really interesting to me is in my time has been working out that in fact often quite a lot of the decision making is being done by the women quietly in the background, and, you know, working with their husbands outside the sub-branch meetings themselves, but there haven't been a lot of women stepping up to take on the formal positions. And so that's something that we've been encouraging. We've seen some really lovely change in that regard. Last year, we've had our first fully female sub-branch executive elected, which doesn't sound like a big thing in this day and age, but for our organisation, that is a really big shift to have an all-female executive of a sub-branch, and quite a large sub-branch too. We have a lot more women now in sub-branch executive roles, and also moving up through the district council levels. And now we have 3 women on the board. So when I was appointed to the board, because I'm an independent board member, so when I was appointed to the board, I believe I was the 4th woman who'd ever sat on the board in 100 years. At that time, there was one other woman on the board. There was a period when I was the only woman on the board. And so, you know, it's been a real challenge to work out how to encourage more women and more older women to take on roles that traditionally they haven't taken on, and to do that in a way which has been accepted by the rest of the membership. And we've done that in a couple of ways. Some of it's about just, you know, showing our leadership. So having me there has been very confronting for some people. There's no denying that. I was appointed as the first time they'd had an independent board member, the first time they'd had a chair who wasn't the elected president, the first, you know, and then I'm a woman and I'm non-service. So that's really challenging for a lot of people, and I completely respect that. And so for me, it's been about building up trust and really listening and getting to know the membership. And, you know, I've felt very honoured be welcomed and to be part of the organisation. But by doing that, and by then identifying some younger women, tapping them on the shoulder and convincing some of them to join the board or to put their hands up for the district president roles, it's been very interesting then to see some of the older women who've been in the organisation for a long time saying, well, I think I'd like to do that now. We had a photo, one of the women last year at our annual Congress said, we need to take a photo of all these women who are in the room in official capacities. And so we had this beautiful photo up on the stage, and there were quite a lot of women there for whom that was a really big moment, because they'd been in the organisation for decades, but never felt like they could put their hands up for an identified leadership role, and now they are doing that. So it's a really exciting time for us. And as Tricia was saying, that changes so much of the conversation that we have throughout the organisation and the board, the years of wisdom, the different range of views, the lived experience. It's so important that we have that. So it's really exciting time for us in that regard.
Thank you, Sophie. It's that another thing is just popping into my mind. It's that you can't be what you can't see. And I really, I commend you for what it's worth to step into a place where you are the odd one out in so many ways, but then being able to stick with it so that others can be what they can see. And at War Widows, we come from a bit of a different, we're very heavily female focused and built. So we haven't had to go through that journey as much, but the importance of having women willing to step into those roles is all about women that are willing to lead the way. Tricia, did you have a point that you wanted to mention on that?
Well, I was just going to say, because I talked a lot about our generational diversity, and that's important for us because we have a very female board, and we have our one Stuart Clark, I'll shout him out, our one male deputy chair member. So that intergenerational diversity is really important for getting as much diversity around the table. And that's why I'm talking about how harnessing the older voice too is so important. So little different perspectives, but always similar issues.
Yeah, and again, I think it's circling around everything, that there's really common themes coming out strongly from both of you. Not only unique to this sector, but across corporate governance in general. And I hope, we are, through this conversation, inspiring others on other boards or people that sit as part of other organisations to think about putting their hands up, or to think about, or get interested in governance and being part of the leadership of their organisations. Jennifer, you bring a bit of a different perspective to this conversation in the sense that you have worked for a long time in the public sector, being it in the state government or the federal government, and in the health sectors as well. And traditionally, they attract a lot of women. So I guess not unlike War Widows New South Wales. From your perspective, I guess I'm wondering, what does inclusion look like for women working in these sectors? What are the things that they can come up against, and how do you think they can overcome them? Your microphone is turned off.
Thanks, Renee. Look, both those two sectors are very similar, that they're female dominated. But when you look at some of the data, you might be surprised in 2024 that most of the senior positions within those two sectors are actually led by men. For example, in the health sector, the highest paid group tend to be the doctors, which are predominantly male. Orthopaedics is a good example, where only 4% of orthopaedic surgeons are actually female. Now, I won't go into the background of why that is, but predominantly female, less likely to get into the senior executive service. The other thing you have in the public sector, which is a little bit different, is that the super funds that they're paying into encourage you to leave at a certain point. And it's usually at that point where you've got the most experience, qualifications and experience, and you leave the sector to retire. I think for particularly for those two sectors, we need to start to value that experience and qualifications, but we also need to build an environment within those sectors that actually encourage women to stay, not only from a career advancement point of view, but also to make sure that there's flexible work practices. Now, a good example is, and Trish will be able to relate to this, at that age at the end of, your late 40s, 50s, you've got elderly parents, and usually it falls to the female to be the carer, which can potentially impact on their career, but we don't have a workplace structure that actually says that's a positive thing to do for not only your parents, but positive for your community. So women tend to have to either leave their occupation or reduce their hours to be able to care for elderly parents. As I said, it's more likely to be female than male, so that impacts on their ability. I think people talk about having, a supportive and inclusive workplace that empower women to do this. But I think in general, women have to do it themselves. Collectively, I think they have to, start to lobby governments around stuff like workplace inclusion, around stuff like leave, accommodation, to be able to manage both a busy career, but also to care for families, but also to develop a culture of respect. I think that women, as you age, I'll give you a good example. Yesterday I was at the golf course, just a little side issue, and I was about to pay to go and play golf, and these two gentlemen walked in, pushed in front of me, and started to pay their fees. And I looked at the guy behind the counter, and he said, "Oh, I'll just let these guys go because they need to head off before you." After they'd gone, I turned around to the guy and I said, "Oh, actually, did you see that I was there to pay my G?" Oh, he said, "I didn't see you." I said, "Well, you might like to reflect on that, sir, why you didn't see me." He walked out, but what it made me think is that, yes, there is an invisible age. I think something as simple as that pointed to me that we really do need to start to call this out, and we really do need to start to create an environment where women are empowered to continue to contribute to their profession, but also to the community within their career.
I admire the way you called that out so patiently, Jennifer. Well done. And
I didn't hit him with my stick.
No, because these things can be deeply emotional and triggering. And I think for a lot of women that, have come up in different workplaces or have had different experiences throughout their lives, the minute something like that happens and you have that trigger of feeling invisible again, though I think the way you handled that was beautiful. You might like to think about that. I'm going to write that down. But I think what I'm hearing from you in terms of drawing that point together, it's really, we have a role to play ourselves as women, and it starts with really understanding the environment and the context that we're operating in, whether that be at work or in society, and what the roles are that we're playing in that, and whether we are playing that traditional role and trying to get out of our own way, in a sense, to back ourselves in stepping out of those roles, or to back ourselves in stepping into those roles. Bernie, I know you have some thoughts on this, and I'm sure much of the conversation is resonating in terms of your experience in the financial sector.
Absolutely.
What have you observed in terms of women, particularly as they age, who perhaps don't have that confidence, or perhaps aren't sure whether they should be stepping up, or perhaps aren't even aware of the role they're playing?
Absolutely. Firstly, I'll just it really resonated with me what Jennifer just said then about calling things out, because I've been on a mission to do that in the media. And so often I'm reading things and there's an assumption that firstly a financial advisor is a male, not a female, and that the people who are most engaged women. There was one of those, just in the Sunday newspaper, when people write in with their questions about superannuation, I actually contacted the journalist about it to say, I read the same letter that you did, and you assumed that it was a man asking these questions. And the way that you responded to that spoke about him being very gender specific. I said, I can't see any reason why you thought that was a man that was writing that question. And these are these unconscious biases that just permeate. So I'm on a bit of a mission to call them out as often as I can. But in the job that I do, I think that it boils down a lot to confidence, and that's probably no different to what the other panelists here have been speaking about. Women often don't have that confidence to step up into various roles, or that in my experience with my clients and even some colleagues, I just find that women don't always have that confidence. And I think it comes from a fundamental, in some ways, a lack of literacy, financial literacy. And there's a lot that's been written on that and the importance of financial literacy and some of the cultural barriers that we have to women actually gaining that knowledge. So I'm really wanting to encourage more and more people to, particularly at a younger level, at a younger age, just to get that financial literacy, because it does have a very direct impact on their long-term financial outcomes. And associated with that, you might think it's strange for me to connect these two things, but I actually think tech literacy is just as important. I think if you're not tech literate, we know that you're going to be left behind, and particularly with the AI boom that's coming up ahead of us. So I think the combination of financial literacy and tech literacy is really important to women, and particularly for women as they get older. And it can really protect them against the risks of financial abuse. And that's a big issue in our society. I don't think it's often spoken about. I think people are often ashamed if they're the victim of financial abuse. So I think that there's a real role that we have in society, and my job is actually with investors is often a role educating them. They don't have to end up being financial gurus. They don't have to be investment wizards, but they really do need to understand just some of the very basics around investments, and to be able to sort of take control of their financial life as they would their health or any other aspect of their life. Yeah, so I don't know if that's answered the question there, Renee.
Absolutely, and I think you've hit on a really important point about how to, and that is there's confidence, and how to build your confidence, and building your confidence by starting to understand the issue. And you've also leveraged the point that Jennifer talked about around those traditional roles, and we certainly see it in our organisation, in our sector. A lot of women still play the traditional role in many ways. The defence and veteran sector still operates like it's 1950, or the expectations are, that women will have extra caring responsibilities, that they don't need to worry about the finances, that the man will still be the breadwinner. But of course, when everything gets turned upside down, it doesn't always happen that way.
That's right. And in fact, the secret is that the men really don't know what they're doing anyway a lot of the time.
That is a great tip.
They're actually in need of advice. And it's interesting that I think that men will often, and forgive me for generalising, but I think it's difficult for some men of a certain age and a certain standing in society to actually say, I don't really get this. I really don't understand this aspect of whatever it's got to do with investing or finance. Whereas women are quite happy to say, I don't get it. Tell me all about it. So women do have a lack of confidence, but I think the flip side of that is that men are often overly confident, and that can also lead to very poor financial outcomes.
Absolutely. Jennifer, I can see you've got your hand up, and I will come to you in just a sec. I think this is a really important part around building that confidence, and I'm interested to hear from each of you on this question without notice. But Jennifer, I'll go to you first.
No, Bernie, that resonated really with me, because in my previous role of Deputy Commissioner, having met a number of widows, I was surprised how many of them did not have access to bank accounts, how many did not know how to even fill their car up with petrol, and suddenly their partner dies and they're left there. So they either have to depend on families, which, as you said, brings its own risk with elderly abuse. But quite surprising the number of women in that particular age group, late 70s, early 80s, who had no access to money, and everything was managed by the male partner. Very difficult.
I deal with a number of women whose husbands have passed away, and I would never underestimate them, but it's just wonderful just to see their confidence grow and them sort of thinking, actually, it wasn't that hard. Admittedly, they've got they're seeking financial advice, but they do embrace it, and they want to learn about it. They don't want to become gurus. They're not particularly interested, but they really just they really benefit from emotionally having that comfort that they know exactly that they're on top of things.
Trisha, I do want to bring you in here. You didn't start off as Tricia Hobson, corporate lawyer, board chair. And I imagine you've had to learn to build your confidence over the years, and take on things that perhaps, you know, you weren't comfortable with. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what are some of the ways that women of any age can start to step out and build that confidence?
It's a big question.
It is a big question.
It is a big question. Because I think in terms of my own personal journey, building that confidence, it's a step-by-step process. You know, it's about being able to take a step that you might be scared about, whatever it might be in the workplace, a case that's harder, something to do with a relationship, achieving it,
Mm-hmm.
and then realizing, okay, I can do that, and then going to the next step and building those layers so that you become more and more confident. I think, you know, this probably ties into that sort of, and I know that we're going to talk later a bit about maybe imposter syndrome and when do you ever get, people often say, do you ever get over that? And I think that there, I'm not as big a fan about the term imposter syndrome. I certainly suffered from what I think most people view it as for a lot of my career, but I think you do get to the point in your life and career where you have taken enough steps and you've successfully done so to build enough confidence. But when I say successfully done so, you also have to fail sometimes, and they're the biggest. It's the old thing about failure teaches you so much more than success, and it does. And women in the corporate world, and particularly as I was coming through, you know, there are a lot of hard steps and a lot of mini failures along the way, and they teach you so much. So really, it is about, so I think women start, you know, whatever stage you are in your life and career, it is about taking the step and realizing that if you do fail, you will learn a lot, but take it anyway, because either way it will build your confidence. But also around, my advice would be around also seeking help and looking for allies and forging friendships with other women. That's something that I focused on very, very early in my career. I had a few experiences where I actually had one or two women who were not that nice to me. And I actually swore that that would be a thing I would concentrate on in my career, was supporting other women, because I got let down very early in my career by some. And I think that don't be afraid, and it's really important to build that network around you, that friendship network, the colleague network, and particularly with other women where you can share stories and you get confidence through realizing you're not alone. I think that particularly for women, it's better now, but a lot of women coming through, when I did, you were either the only woman in the room or one of very few, and you felt lonely because you didn't have, it wasn't like them. So building that network and talking and sharing the stories is really powerful and important to build confidence as well.
Yeah, and not only were you not like them in the room, you weren't part of the clique, right? You know, they all had their relationships and their commonalities, and incredibly confronting to walk into a room like that. I can see Sophie nodding. But incredibly confronting to walk into a room like that. And you've just pulled out a really important point, and that is to set up your own support network. So when you do walk into the room and you are the only one, you have a support network to fall back on. You have someone you can pick up the phone to, you can debrief with someone. I think it's incredibly important advice. Sophie, I am interested in a bit more of your journey on that, and if you have something else you can offer. I'm building a nice little list here about layering and different elements to confidence, and I'm very, very happy to share it with the broader network here, because this is beautiful advice.
Look, I really recognise a lot of what Tricia's said in terms of her journey. Mine has been quite similar. I think as I've got older, one of the things that I've learned is that it's okay to feel unconfident, or whether it's described as imposter syndrome or in the moment, why am I here? What should I be doing? And it's actually about acknowledging that you're feeling that way and then knowing what you're going to do about it. Not letting it overwhelm you and not letting it stop you. So when I was younger, if I felt like that, I'd think, oh, well, I'm just not going to do that thing or go to that thing. And I think as you get older, it's having some tips and tricks in your, you know, up your sleeve to help you in that moment deal with that. I was a litigator for a long time in my commercial law career, and so I spent a lot of time up in court. And so as I had my own teams, particularly of younger women, we used to talk a lot about, you know, what does it feel like when you're about to go up to the federal court for the first time and have to talk to a judge in front of all these male barristers often. And I used to talk to them about putting on their Wonder Woman cape. And the idea was, it was an analogy for putting, you know, putting on your metaphorical cape, and even though inside you might be quaking in your boots and saying, what on earth am I doing here? No one else can see that. All they see is your exterior. They don't need to know that you feel like that. And also we used to talk about having some tools, things that made you feel confident. So whether it was something physical, like a particular piece of clothing that made you feel, you know, better, you know, your favorite jacket or your whatever it might be, or whether it was that you had a piece of music that just made you feel like you could take on the world and you'd just play it quickly in your office before you went. My husband does that with my girls, my teenagers now, when they're on their way to their exams, they have a couple of pieces and they play them in the car because it makes them feel like they can fly. So it's just, it might be a piece of, you know, something that you, a passage from something you've read that reminds you that, yes, I can do this. But it's just, I think it's about, I think there's always moments in our lives, and it's the same for men too, although as you say, they're not always, they don't always admit to it, but there's always moments in our lives when we feel out of our depth, when we wonder why we've been chosen for something, when we are nervous about taking something on. And I think it's having the tools to acknowledge that and knowing what you're going to do about it that will allow you to keep going and take that step. And as Tricia said, also having the tools to know what you're going to do if it doesn't work out, you know, and have those people you can talk to. They're the really important things.
I'm getting flashbacks of my time when I was first admitted as a solicitor and I had to appear just at the coroner's court. And I was terrified, absolutely terrified. And I remember going into the assistant crown solicitor's office, and she looked at me and she said, "What are you scared of?" It's like everything, like just everything. And you know, basically said to me, "You have nothing to be scared of. They're just people. And I think you can do this." And quite often that's all you need from that senior woman, you know, who you're working with to give you that confidence to step in. And, you know, just to end the anecdote, and for, you know, both you and Tricia, you'll understand, and any other lawyers watching, I totally said my appearance backwards. And thankfully the magistrate was also a woman, and she just looked at me and she gave me the kindest smile and she just said yes, and we just proceeded and we were good to go. So you know, those experiences, it's still with me today, but it was the first time I realized I needed to get out of my own way.
The other thing I just wanted to pick up from what Tricia said was really the importance of older and senior women who've been through sharing and mentoring, and whether it's formal or informal. There's one of my biggest bugbears is women, and this isn't, you know, women who've got into the lifeboat and pulled the ladder up after them, you know, who've fought those hard battles, and sort of say, well, I'm there and you'll all have to do it as hard as I did. It's just, I have no time for that. So I think it's really, really important that, you know, all of us still have things that we're facing, but to be helping women younger women coming through in whatever form they need that assistance is absolutely vital.
Yeah. Jennifer, do you have any experiences to share on this? I know in your time in the public service, you spent a lot of time talking with younger women and public servants as well, and really empowering them to come on through.
You know, I think what Sophie and Tricia have already said, making sure, you know, you speak up, make sure you're well prepared before you go into do an address or advocate. But I think the thing that sort of I have taken responsibility for since retiring is advocating much more around change, particularly for women. People that those of us that are retired, I think also have a responsibility to make sure we advocate for women, that women need to be represented at all levels of government, but also in other sectors. And I think we need to be the ones speaking out for that change. I look at both sides of politics. They're always talking about quotas or they meet this, but that's really not the answer. The answer really is someone should be promoted on their merit. And the merit selection process needs to make sure it's a balanced process, so that when someone is being appointed is based on merit, but at the same time the issue around equity comes in. So I think advocating for change, we need to continue to do that and make sure that we're actually advocating for women at all different stages of life.
I think the points that we've been talking about in terms of inclusion and confidence also apply in that arena as well. And imagine if we could craft our government in the way we get to craft our boards, how good would we be as a society? But it's part of it is confidence for women in the community of all ages to step up and to step forward. And it can look very unattractive at times for women to do so.
Particularly because the caring role falls back to women. So that's the time factor.
How do they balance that?
How do they balance that? And you don't have an environment, a work environment that actually supports that caring role. So the ability to be able to influence those sorts of decisions, women's hands are tied because of their caring role.
Yeah. Bernie, one of the things that I'm hearing common amongst the panel at the moment, first of all, you started the conversation on confidence, so thank you. But one of the other things that I'm hearing from the panel is all about the importance of women being there to support women and to really lift each other up and not pull the ladder up, as Sophie mentioned earlier. How do you see that in the financial sector? Is it any different? Do you need more of it? And then how do we better empower ourselves to do that?
I think I've had experiences just as Tricia said, early in my career when that absolutely wasn't the case. But I've also just benefited from the most incredible role models that I've had, and some women who've just been amazing, and really just hope that I can share some of that with the next generation. What I like to talk to some of the young women about is that whilst we might always just talk about the barriers that are there in front of women, I think we need to actually be quite clear about all those benefits that there are in being a woman in industry, or for me, I can only talk about my industry in finance. And I've had a number of experiences over the years where, I first might say that a level of technical competency, absolute technical competency is a must. There is no excuses, no matter what you are, what gender you are, what race, what age you are, that's a given. You must be highly technically competent, whatever you're doing. So once we've ticked that box, I actually have spoken to a number of women about the great advantage that they have, I believe, in our industry from being a woman. And that's coming back to this issue I said before around education, that often the role, and I think maybe it's not that different in other industries. I'm thinking about if you're a doctor, there's a lot to do with educating your patient about what's happening with them, what they need to be doing around their health. Maybe in the law and other industries as well, that educating your clients to let them understand the environment that they find themselves in, that's such an important role. And the very fact that women lack confidence in that area gives an opening for someone who's there to educate and help a real advantage. So I've had more than one occasion when I've had actually men who've come to me privately to say, I really don't understand what happened at that board meeting in terms of the finances. Can you help me? And I think, wow, it took me years to realize that's actually a secret weapon that I've got here working in this industry. And again, start by saying that the technical competency is a given, but once you've got that, I think turn it on its head, and it's a real advantage to be a woman. And that's what I like to share with other women who might be thinking, oh gosh, I'm going to get into this world of banking and finance and it's all going to be so tough. I think, no, you can really make it work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And be a champion of yourself, which is incredible to see the value add that you bring in amongst a group that you're probably feeling, we talked earlier, feeling a bit of a fish out of water in. And you've also highlighted another point, and we talk about how can women support women, but you've raised another little anecdote for me, and that is quite often a lot of the mentors that I've had have been men who have seen something in me and encouraged me to get out of my own way, or help me build the awareness of, you know, perhaps you lack a bit of confidence here, and here's what you can do about it. And I think that guiding force, wherever it comes from, so long as that person is actually there for you and is championing you, which you'll find out really quickly if they're not, as you know, Tricia, I think that it's really important. And yeah, it's, you know, this is gold. It's pure gold. It's now time to hear your questions. I have dominated the questions because we have an incredible panel who is sharing absolute pure pearls of wisdom with us tonight. So please feel free now to use the Q&A function and put your questions in there. And they will come through to me, and we'll see how many we can get to in the time we have left. While people are thinking about their questions, though, we've talked a bit to confidence and imposter syndrome, so I'm not going to go there, but what I'm wondering is, have you ever felt invisible in your careers at any age, and how did you overcome that? And Tricia, I'm going to start with you.
Just trying to think back. Yeah, of course, I've had many moments where I've felt invisible in various ways. I think probably when I was younger, particularly the law is very male heavy, and less so now, obviously, in terms of statistics. But I think it's been where I've been the one woman in the room, and it's that classic, and it's almost a cliche for a reason, and that is that I will say something and the conversation keeps moving, and then it goes on, and later on a man says exactly the same thing, and it gets traction. That happened time and time and time again. That's why it's a thing. I think that was probably, and it's interesting though, when I was younger, I remember being a young partner, and I remember thinking, I really need to get older, because I don't think any one of them are taking me seriously enough as a partner. I can't believe I ever wanted to be, nothing is wrong to being older. I love being older, but you know, it's like, it's most
this is me working in this sector every day. I feel like if I was just a little bit older, they would listen.
They'd take me more seriously, right?
Yeah.
Because yes, it was that feeling. It was like they'll take me more seriously if I'm just a bit older. So it's more that I probably felt, you know, that was something I felt quite a bit, and for quite a number of years, because I'd watch all the, you know, very, you know, older male partners, very with their tall and deep voices, and, you know, they would, they'd walk in the room and the clients would immediately. But you know what I did as a woman? I adapted. Going back to Bernie's point, maybe it's a slightly different version of it. I used how I dressed and how I presented myself, particularly as a bit of a weapon.
Right.
I don't necessarily advocate. I think times have moved on, and I think you don't necessarily have to think of your dress in that way. But even heels, you know, of my era, I would, because I'd want to be taller, and you'd get a bit more noticed, and little things that give you a bit of armor to make you sort of more noticed. And that's how I dealt with it, because I can't be the 6 foot deep voiced man, so I have to find my own way to stand out, to not be invisible, and to not feel that way.
Yeah, thank you, Trish. That's really powerful. And I'm trying to think, if I could do the heels, I probably couldn't.
I still do them on occasion, but
they're absolutely killer. And for anyone out there that hasn't seen Trish's heels, you need to look at our photos. They are gorgeous. But I think it's really important advice, finding that piece of armor to get you noticed when you're feeling that way, and not turning it in on yourself. Jennifer, you've worked a lot. Last question. You've worked a lot within the veteran sector, and And I'm wondering if you have had similar experiences to Trisha, to myself, when, you know, you've been sitting there as part of these groups and you're in charge in New South Wales and ACT. Did you ever feel invisible throughout that time, and how did you manage that?
Thanks, Renee. Yes, it's a very interesting sector. When I came into that probably, 12 or 15 years ago, not that it's changed much since, male dominated. And certainly there was this view that I remember going to a meeting and someone with a male who was with DBA, and when we walked into the room, they all acknowledged him and thought he was the Deputy Commissioner, not me. So I sat there, and then we went around the table and introduced, "Oh, I'm so sorry." But what it said to me was they were still very much focused on the person that was seen in the room. Had to be a male, couldn't be a female. Yeah. You just got to look at the leaders of Army, Navy, Air Force. It ain't changed. And the head of the Defence Force. We're looking forward to a female in those to change that. But yeah, no,
there's some strong females coming through, as you know, those of us that keep a watch on this. It's quite it's again, you can't be what you can't see. And with, I think, a lot more women coming through the Defence Force, unless they see other women that are pioneering, that are moving into these senior leadership roles.
And a lot of the old veterans thought it was all right. It was not a problem to smack you on the bum as you walk past, or make a comment about how you were dressed, So I initially used to just accept it and move on, but then I started to recognise, well, if I don't say something, if I don't speak out, the person that comes after me will still continue to have the same attitude. But yes, so just a slap on the hand every now and again helped. But they're an interesting group.
What did you say earlier? Perhaps you should think about that, or something like that. The words you used.
Yeah, I said, well, maybe you should reflect.
Maybe you should think about that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I'm sure Sophie, having worked in this space, would have to agree that there's certain culture that still exists within the ex-service community, particularly with those people that have been around for a long time. It's all right, girlie, we'll look after this.
How good is that?
Oh, it's fantastic. You can imagine what I say.
It's probably not. Maybe you should think about it. Sophie, interested in your experience, I guess, both, coming into this sector as well as having broader experience outside and in a diversity of sectors, about this feeling of invisibility and how, we can turn it in on ourselves, and how you've gotten over that in your career.
Yeah, so look, it's interesting. I've thought about this, and the moment I remember being really invisible was when I was very young, and I was a staff representative on a board at the law firm I worked at, and I was put into this role because they needed us. I was the person who was the designated staff representative, tick the box. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what a board did. I didn't know what this board did. I was quite a junior lawyer, and I remember going to these board meetings and sitting in these board meetings and not saying a word. And I may, feeling completely invisible and not having the confidence at that stage to tap someone on the shoulder and say, look, what's my role supposed to be here? Am I supposed to speak up or not? So that was a very invisible moment for me. And I don't actually think that I did do anything about it, because I didn't have the tools to do that at that stage. But conversely, I think quite a lot of the rest of my career, and certainly my board career, has been the opposite, which is quite often because I have been the only woman in the room initially on some of the boards, or as I said before, stepping in as a complete outsider to the veteran world. I'm actually very visible because people are sort of watching and saying, well, what's she doing here, and why is she here, and how's she going to behave? And so that's kind of a different way, and it's made me have to think very hard constantly about how am I carrying myself, what am I saying to people, how am I building relationships with people. So that's been really interesting. I think the thing I would say in terms of how do you deal with those moments where you are invisible, there's all sorts of different things you can do, and it depends on the context of the situation. But we did talk earlier about the importance of having male, what I called on one of my other books, what we called male allies. And I think that is something that you can sometimes do in certain situations. If there are men in that situation who you trust and who actually genuinely are there for you, then getting them, asking them to help you have a bit more of a voice can be quite helpful. And I don't like saying that because women shouldn't have to ask men to give them a voice, but there are situations in which that can actually be a tool, and saying to these people, well, can you introduce me to this network of yours, or can you make sure that I'm invited to that particular event? Sometimes that's something that can help to sort of get you that foot in the door that's missing. But it's an ongoing issue, and I think we all have a lot of examples of bad behaviour and things that we're putting up with. And I remember when the Me Too movement started, really started unfurling, and a few of my girlfriends who I'd worked with over the years said, look, quite frankly, I think it would be easier if we got the women who hadn't had a bad experience to put their hand up, because there wouldn't be very many of them, because every one of us at some point in our lives or our careers, sadly, has experienced something that we really shouldn't have. So it's common discussion.
Yeah, it is. And I think, just important things there. You talked about, other elements of armor, other elements of your village and your support network, and how being mindful about how you're carrying yourself. And I don't know if you noticed, but I did pin my shoulders back when you mentioned that. So thank you for that reminder. We are very rapidly running out of time, but I just am interested in a final thought from all of you, and that is on one thing that we can all do in our daily lives, whether we are watching this now or watching the recording, to inspire that inclusion of women of any age. And Bernie, I am going to flick to you first, because you've been quiet for a little bit.
Okay. The one thing I would encourage all women to do is self-education.
Yeah.
And I know it's all very topical, but AI is heading our way. And the good thing is that there's no ageism or sexism. The younger generation and men, they don't know anything either. So we're all on a level playing field here. So embrace the technology, become sort of tech literate and absolutely financially literate as well. I think those two things going hand in hand is great. That's great protection for women, and will really help empower them in their financial security.
Yeah, and ChatGPT doesn't make fun of you, just wants to help.
That's it.
Trisha.
I'm just thinking, we've already touched on a lot of the things that we can do in terms of network and support, etc. One of the things when I sort of coach, mentor women these days, I say to them, one of the things I always talk about is getting a little more educated on the politics of the workplace. Now, I don't like politics of the workplace, but I probably suffered a lot of my hardest lessons through thinking just merit, just a voice, and not understanding enough about institutions which are deeply male by nature because they were created. And there's always politics that goes around. And I think women have not been as tapped into understanding it and navigating it in a constructive, authentic way. I'm not talking about getting in there and going at it like question time in Parliament House. I'm talking about just kind of being a bit wiser and thinking about those things. And I always give that advice to people I coach and mentor about how to think about that and make sure that you embrace it as something you need to engage with in a constructive, authentic way.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more. And a lot of that, it's I think it's a gap for a lot of us, because a lot of us naturally recoil from it and we don't want to be part of it. So I think that is excellent.
Or some of us kind of put the sword in the hand and go in, boots and all, and then sometimes come out with a few scars on your back.
Yeah. Sophie, final thought from you.
Look, I think for me, the thing that's, and I totally agree with what Bernie and Trisha have said. They're both things that I absolutely agree with. But if I'm going to add another one, I think for me, it's that important piece about making sure we tap other women on the shoulder and bring them along with us, and not waiting for women to step up. And we've talked a lot today we've been talking a lot about boards and roles in finance and senior roles. But I think what I would want to say to people listening is, this applies to all of this applies to everybody, no matter what you're doing in your life. And, it applies as much if you're busy being a mum at the moment or a carer in some sense. but you're involved in your community. It's about saying to other women, yes, I'm in the same boat as you, or I've been in the same boat as you, and I think you should come along and you should have a go at this thing. Because much as we'd like to think things have changed, the reality is that there are still a lot of women out there who, in whatever part of their life it is they're thinking about, don't feel empowered to put their hand up or to ask for help or to say, I'd like to have a go at this thing. So for me, the real key is to make sure you're watching out for women, tapping them on the shoulder and encouraging them to come along and have a go at whatever it is they want to have a go at.
Absolutely. And showing that vulnerability in yourself to bring someone else along, which in and of itself can be incredibly confronting. Jennifer, final thought, last but not least.
Thanks. Look, obviously very agree with Trish and Bernie and Sophie. But one of the things I think we all need to do is actually listen to other women's stories. We actually need to learn from their wisdom, and we need to value their acknowledgement, and we actually need to highlight that experience. You pick up papers, newspapers, Women's Weekly, whatever it may be. We don't see enough older women or women from ordinary lives, I think it's an ordinary life, being profiled. So I think, yes, we need to listen to our other women's stories. We need to learn from their wisdom, and we need to value their knowledge.
Completely organic, but you've just wrapped this webinar. So thank you, because that's exactly what today has been about. And I certainly hope that everyone out there has learnt something, has been able to take something away from this webinar. And, you know, I'm incredibly humbled to hear from all of you and to take all of those lessons and think about the incredible bestseller book I'm now going to write as a result of it. But no, I joke, but it honestly has been our absolute pleasure, and we're incredibly grateful. On behalf of everyone watching, thank each and every one of you for spending the time with us, for sharing your views and your stories, some of them deeply personal, but I know resonate across our community. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for this evening, and we have run a little bit over. I do thank all of you for staying. You are seeing some information pop up on the screen now in front of you. I do hope that you all enjoy International Women's Day tomorrow, however you are marking that day. And I do wish you a very good evening and good night. Thank you once again.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.